that out after. So hang tight and we're almost ready to go here. All right, so we're going to get started. Um, we will first, everybody, welcome. Thanks so much for jumping on this webinar with Napa Technology. We are going to be talking about the changing wine aisle and how sampling really impacts sales, which is pretty exciting. We have two great panelists, as well as Jane Portnoy from Napa Technology to talk about sampling and data and all of that good stuff. So, a few housekeeping issues before we get started. You have a panel, a control panel on the right side of your screen. And what you can do there at the bottom is there's a little chat. And if you have a question, issues, etc., then go ahead and type it in there and we will get to it as fast as we can. This will run about 45 to 50 minutes, and then we'll do some questions, and that includes the questions at the end. We will send the deck out to everyone. The recording, not the record, the recording is not being recorded. The webinar is being recorded, and that recording will be sent out as well. It takes me about 48 hours to update it and then get it back out to you. If we're answering questions at the end and we don't get to your question, we do our best to get back to those questions um, offline. And if we don't have an answer for you, we'll try and find somebody who does. So, I am Karen Oliver. I am with Angel Smith. We are helping Napa manage this webinar. So, we're going to get started. So, obviously, welcome. Thanks again. Your panelists today are Ed Cook and Jack Robertiello. And Ed is from Harris Teeter. He's going to share with us some really cool information about how they are using sampling and some of the results that they've seen. And then Jack has been a reporter for a very, very long time. He also consults a lot of different brands on spirits, the industry, and on beverage. Lots of great wine experience, and he's going to share that with you today as well. So, two other people. Your host is Jane Portnoy. She is the VP of Marketing and Brand Strategy from Napa Technology. She has a ton of great marketing experience in the wine category, and she can answer a lot of questions for you that you might have about sampling and in grocery. Her email is on the slide. I think everybody on the webinar also has my email. And if you need to, or you forget Jane's email or whatever, just give me a shout and I will get all the information back over to you. I am your moderator, which basically means that I'm going to jump in and try and clarify information. I will also manage all of the questions at the end and make sure that you get the webinar deck and all of that. I've been working in this industry for a little while, have a little bit of brand experience, and I think my best experience is just loving wine, and hope to learn a lot more about it from our panelists today. So, a little bit about Napa Technology before we get into the webinar. They were, now you guys have probably all seen one of their wine stations. They developed that in response to not being able to, they originally, the guys who started this originally wanted to be able to open a wine bar. And when they went out and they were looking for some technology solutions, they really couldn't find anything that they were looking for. And so they decided, being in the technology sector, they were like, hey, we're just going to build this ourselves and we're going to make it better. And they did. Evidence of that is that they were named as one of the year's most innovative products by Inc. magazine. And they're also one of my favorite after work activities. I go over to the lodge in Tiburon and I use their self serve wine station after a long day. Did I say after? I meant actually during lunch.
During.
Yeah, during. It's super fun. So webinar, what we're going to cover today is we've got, I think I mentioned that great case study from Harris Teeter and Ed Cook. He's one of our panels today. Super excited. So welcome, Ed. And Napa just completed a survey of grocery and wine retailers, and we're going to share the data from that as well. That's exciting stuff. We're also going to talk about the shifting consumption patterns and how those changes impact the bottom line. And the last thing is, what really is that impact on sales? Um, so again, questions we're going to do at the end, and you can type them in into your panel and type them in at any time, and don't worry about waiting until the end. So, Jack, I think you are going to talk about the value of the marketplace for us.
Sure. One of the things I think is really important to note when you're talking about wine in general is what has changed in the way Americans drink wine, not just the enormous amount that we increasingly drink every year, but the ways in which we drink it. And one of the most important changes that's occurred in the on-premise environment has been the development of wine by the glass program. 10 or 12 years ago, restaurants that might carry or offer 5 or 10 or more glasses, more wines by the glass, um, were fairly rare. There'd be one or two in each city. They wouldn't tend to be known as fine dining restaurants. They tend to be known as wine bars or wine restaurants. But since then, through both the changes in technology and the demands of the consumer, really, and the fact that they had these experiences in the pioneer bars and restaurants that did take on more expansive wine by the glass programs. This is what restaurants now have to do. And it's not only fine dining restaurants, almost every restaurant, if they are going to be considered to have a legitimate beverage program, even if wine is not at the core of the program, they need to offer up to 10 or 15 kinds of wine, red, white, rosé, sparkling, for people to enjoy by the glass. And the real reason, besides the fact that people don't always want to drink an entire bottle of wine, can't because of legal issues or want to change during the course of the meal, is that these are sampling experiences. They're sampling while they're in the restaurant, and they're using the restaurant as a way to educate themselves about wines. It's a significant change, and it's in the times when I'm in restaurants, which is quite frequently, you are more likely to see people, if there's a table of four, with 4 different glasses of wine, or at least 4 glasses of wine as opposed to a bottle, even though they may consume well over a bottle at the table during the course of the meal. Pretty significant.
And then, Jack, I have a quick question for you. That off-premise, or I'm sorry, the restaurant wine by the glass really has a big impact on what people are buying at the grocery stores.
Well, it does because you can. I mean, if you think about it as a consumer, as opposed to someone in the business, the opportunity to try a wine that a restaurant recommends and only spend $8 or $9 as opposed to 40 or $50, you're more likely to make the effort. It's hard enough for a consumer that you can't buy wine in a restaurant, that you need to go to another building to get the wine. So to be able to make the experience more meaningful to the consumer so that they leave your restaurant saying, you know, I had that wine, I wrote down the name, now I'm going to buy it, look for it at my retailer. At least one step has been taken. They've been able to have an inexpensive learning experience that they want to follow up, because people who consume wine at dinner are just as likely to be wine shoppers and to consume wine at different occasions. So it is, in
Great.
fact, it's not only a sampling experience in that regard, but there are also still many restaurants that will offer even smaller pours, half glass pours.
Sure.
Some chain restaurants have done this to encourage lunchtime wine consumption for people who really can't manage to drink a whole glass of wine and go back to work.
Great.
Um, so I know I didn't address specifically the numbers here, but I think the numbers, not only through guest metrics, but through many other studies, will tell you, and just conversations in whatever restaurant you go to, if you ask the people who run them anecdotally, um, they might, their process has been, I'm not going to do that. People want to drink wine my way, to, okay, well, I have to introduce more wines by the glass, to, oh my goodness, I need to have 10 or 15. And while there are operational issues um, that people have to take on, it's just a matter of survival and dollars. If your consumers want wine a certain way and you don't provide it to them that way, they might opt for something else. And
Just to echo that point, Jack, we did a piece of research last year for on premise, and what we found was the average number of wines by the glass offerings today is 25, and that's not fine dining. That's reaching all the way down into casual dining, which is putting a lot of pressure on retailers now, because guests have more exposure, and now they want to extend that exposure and their experience into the aisles. So it's demanding on both sides, on and off premise. Consumers are getting smarter, they have more exposure, and they want what they want when they want it.
that's definitely true. And one of the things that's really important as a wine retailer is that while the changes in, in sampling opportunities are changing, you know, they're changing in different ways, state to state and market to market. And uh, simply being a commodity wine seller um, can be very lucrative and not involve a lot of change. However, in every part of the country, new wine shops are opening with completely different attitudes about wine marketing, wine offering, shelving. All these are the sorts of things that make the average wine consumer's retail experience much more sophisticated than it was 10 years ago. This slide talks mostly about the volatility of price in wines in the U.S. How in some cases after the recession, uh, the hardest hit area were wines over $15. That's turned around in the past few years. You know, the core is that the dream of most retailers is the $10 to $15 wine, because it's above the value wine, it's into the premium and super premium, and it's an indicator that your consumer base is getting more sophisticated, or at least more willing to part with their hard-earned dollars in order to buy the wines that you're purchasing and offering at that price point. One of the important things about sampling is that it sort of cuts into the price point issue, because you're segmenting the bottle of wine into smaller portions. That's worked on premise, Off-premise, what the opportunity is that's provided to consumers is the permission to discover that the wine is not bad. They're not looking to see if it's good. They're not looking to see if it's great. They're looking to see that it's not bad, um, which is a different. Don't you think? Don't you think? I mean, I presume you folks have as many casual wine experiences as I do, and the first thing is that you say is what? Oh, that's not bad, and that's all you're looking for is to make certain it's the wine isn't bad, and then you make the price judgment.
Right. That's hilarious. Um, I think what we were seeing too that generally consumers won't jump price points. It's very challenging to get them to go from, a range of 8 to $11 and then into a $30 bottle of wine. But what we've been seeing a little bit is, and Jane, you can obviously jump in on this, is that with sampling, if you give them an opportunity to taste something really good that's a little bit above their normal price range, they will they will move into that higher price range. They might not do it all the time, but they will certainly give it a whirl.
Absolutely. Nice segue, Karen. But we've had the opportunity at Napa Technology to be aggressive about research in the last 4 years. For our customers and for ourselves, we felt it was highly important to keep our fingers on the pulse of what is challenging our customers as well as providing opportunities. So we've seen a very natural progression, especially as the economy has come around, that consumers, whether it's on or off premise, when given the opportunity to splurge, they're absolutely going to take it. But what's happening is that they're just taking it in different doses. As Jack alluded to earlier, half glass offerings have catapulted significantly in the on-premise environment and are having massive impact on revenue. Likewise, that same translation of being able to create a really great experience, something more than just shopping the aisles, is translating now into retailers. What we're seeing, again, as sort of a voyeur into the industry, is that the retail experience that we know traditionally to be grocery is now starting to adapt touches that were found just in wine retail, having wider aisles, more captivating displays. And Jack had mentioned it earlier, instead of just listing varietals by the country from which they come, we're now starting to see wines gathered in groups and displayed by fizzy or light-bodied, bubbly, taste great with fish, ways that make navigating for the consumer a lot easier and really creating some strong experiences in the aisles. What we're finding is these are no longer nice to haves, but must have. One of the things that I find most interesting in our industry is we've seen since 2011 a 63% growth in our equipment being utilized in on-site retail, which means everybody's trying to get ahead of the game in offering some really unique opportunities. Karen, if you could go to the next slide, I'm going to get into some of the data that we discovered in our last poll. So earlier this year, we did a piece of research that crossed over all elements of on-premise retail, from small operators to large grocery stores. So we have a wide breadth of insights here. And what I found really interesting was the polar dynamic on sampling. Everybody's doing it, but there's not a ramp on how they're doing it. They're either doing it daily at 30% of our respondents, so they're doing it daily, or they're doing it once a week. So what we know is sampling is happening. However, it needs to happen aggressively, because 83% of our respondents say that sampling absolutely translates into customers spending more on a bottle. So the challenge now is, how can you do this actively, do it wisely, cost efficiently, and also in a protective format? And I think Ed will share a lot of that. What we did find also interesting was the price points and how sampling is affecting that. The lion's share of bottle sales are happening in that 11 to 30 range. So again, to Jack's point, they just want to try something that's good and not take a gamble on it. But where we're seeing a nice increase is where when sampling is available, consumers are willing to take a much higher risk, almost up to 30% of a bottle increase. So that higher wine level isn't flatlining. If given the chance to sample, people are going to move up into that higher category. So when they're guessing, they're going to stay in that lower mid-range. But when they have an opportunity to sample, they'll move all the way up the level into bottle prices that are $50 and over, which I
Which
think is really
yeah,
interesting.
and I think for most wineries, and certainly the wineries who we've worked with, you know, getting a consumer to move from one price point to the next is really, really challenging. So by offering sampling, this is an opportunity to actually, make that the brass ring of wine marketing actually happen.
Absolutely. And as we have been saying, one of the next growing challenges for operators really is that your wine selection today has to be as dense and competitive as the on-premise operators. You know, if the average is 25 wines by the glass offerings, what does that mean for a retailer that's now trying to be competitive, trying to captivate the customer and keep them in the aisles? Wide selections seem to be the norm. 60% of those surveyed reported having a wine director and now even staff, well-educated staff in the aisles to help consumers make those selections. What we're also seeing is the use of electronics and technology is truly influencing how people are purchasing. They can snap a picture of a wine using an app and understand the points, the flavor profile. So really having educated attendance in your aisles is going to also help that consumer navigate their way through their shopping experience. So here I'm going to punt this right back over to Ed to take us through. Oh, I'm sorry, I lied. This is still me. A few of the numbers a few key numbers out of the research that we did. As I said, 89% of our respondents are offering sampling. So it is happening. It's something that is very much the norm. I don't think that's a surprise there. A large portion of our respondents are utilizing sampling as a daily occurrence. It is part of their strategy. It's part of what they're doing to make their shopping experience unique, and it is translating into sales somewhere between 10 to 25% when sampling is offered. 96% reported increase in bottle sales of 10 to 30%. And I think what's most interesting is case movement. The customers of ours that have been able to provide data are showcasing 60% increase in overall case movement. So it says a lot about being able to sample as much as it says a lot about showcasing your product. The Wine Station gives a beautiful showcase of 4, 8, 12, 16 bottles of wine. It's calling attention from that vast display of aisles and aisles of wine, and it's helping our customers use the
So,
product.
Jane,
As
would
I
you
mentioned, yeah,
would you kind of think about the wine station as almost this very cool, awesome, end cap? Because with other packaged products, that end cap, so you've got a bunch of cereal on, the end of the aisle, that has really been kind of primary real estate for packaged products companies in grocery stores. Do you kind of think that just from the data that you've seen, when you take these bottles, you showcase them in this beautiful machine, is that kind of the equivalent of an end cap, do you think?
I do, and I'm actually going to let Ed answer that question. He's the man in the aisles designing stores, creating the new way that Harris Teeter has been approaching their wine displays. But absolutely, you are 100% correct. As the whole shopping experience becomes more entertaining, to say the least, it's about finding a way to have connectivity with the customer, and whether it's showcasing it in this fancy, snazzy piece of technology, or being able to have something that's highly visible and interactive. And there's a lot of benefits to automated sampling, and I think that's one of them. But I think this is a great way to turn it over to Ed, who, again, is in the trenches daily making some changes, pretty significant changes at Harris Teeter.
Where did Ed go? Uh, hey, Ed. I think we may have lost Ed. Um, hold on one moment. We're gonna find Ed. Um, Jane, it doesn't look
Yes.
like he's sorry about that. It looks like he's dropped off for some reason. I don't know if he lost connectivity or what.
So I will do my best to
Okay.
be Ed. Um, I know less about their business than Ed does, but what I can tell you is they've been a partner of ours for the last 2.5 years, and Harris Teeter is a giant in the grocery industry. They're absolutely leaders in changing the way customers are having that experience, just from filling your cart to having something more dynamic happening when you're at their stores. In 2012, so just this last year, they actually even introduced a new concept store called 201 Central, which actually was named after one of their first locations, that has a singular focus on beer, wine, and specialty food offerings. So if you could imagine, it's sort of your singular go-to for party planning on your way home. If you want to grab foods that are prepackaged, a great bottle of wine. It's a singular another entity that allows their customers to get precisely what they want when they're in sort of that entertainment, quick grab mode. With over 210 stores. Oops, can we go back one?
Yes, sorry. I got excited.
210 stores, and they have a very aggressive approach to what they're doing in their retail wine aisles. They are utilizing the wine station in almost all of their locations, as well as they are utilizing them behind the bar in some of their locations where they have full service restaurants. What Ed had shared with us is the most important elements of being successful is creating an environment that really engages the customer, makes them feel warm and welcomed, also creating a memorable experience. But having successful sampling also relies on the time of day in which you're choosing sampling, the quality of the item. They're curating great items, some proprietary items, as well as some very well-known brand names that customers recognize. So they're utilizing sampling to be a full part of the experience. Now we can go to the next slide. What Ed has shared with us is 65% of sampling events are related to promotions. So sampling isn't just an afterthought. It's part of their full strategy. It's part of their calendar of events. They often tailor them around wines that pair well for Thanksgiving favorites, holidays, creating, sampling that has seasonal relevance to it, and as well as sparkling wines at the time period that they make the most sense. And 35% of their offerings are tied to new brand launches. What I'm also reading here are some of their biggest challenges seem to be blurring the lines of categories, that it really does take smart display on their part to have wines that are less about appellation and more about the type of wine. That seems to be the way that the consumer is gravitating their shopping experience. And then when they have a poor performer, they'll often replace it with a very easy to find, easy to palate red blend or a sweeter wine.
I am loving those red blends, by the way. Just FYI for all you wineries on the line today. um, so that leads us into some of the tactical recommendations that we're going to get from Jack today. And so, Jack, I'm going to hand this over to you.
Thanks. One of the things that you notice, I'm in New York, and of course, being in New York City, space is at a maximum premium, and it takes a while to get outside of New York for that to change. And when I do go outside, and get a chance to visit retailers, um, mostly wine and spirits only shops, and they are in the midst of either rebuilding or moving or expanding or designing a new store, or if it's a new store that has never existed before. In addition to all the other modern shopping advantages and requisites like attractive lighting, convenient shelving, smart design, um, those other issues like parking and access. Um, One of the things they almost always insist upon is the creation of a space dedicated not to necessarily to fine wine, but to wine sampling, and where it's allowed, because in some states it's still not, wine and food sampling. Um, and in almost every case, the people that I speak with who do this say the same thing, which is there is an immediate um, response by consumers whenever we do a wine tasting. So the, the more space we can give to it and the more that space is dedicated and convenient, the better off everybody is. And the more likely they are to be able to attract not just the local distributor representatives or the traveling uh, representative who knows a little bit more about the wine and the winery and the area, but the winemaker, him or herself, or someone from there. I just met 2 days ago with some folks from Chile who have come to the United States for 2 weeks, and some of their time will be spent with distributors talking about their wines and doing training. The rest of the time, they're pouring in places that have already turned out to be good markets for them. So all
And
this is around about.
those are the actual winemakers in?
Yes. The more the this is anecdotal, of course,
Right.
again, but I'm told that the closer you can get to the actual winery in terms of having the person who pours, the
Mhm.
more likely you are to get people really interested because they believe that they're talking with, and they are talking with someone whose hands are on the creation of the wine. It does the price point is irrelevant. It could be somebody who's making a $9 wine or a $50 wine, but it's their connection. And wineries, we know, are constantly sending people out if they know that your operation is able to draw 30 or 40 or 50 people in the 2 hour period of time who have been invited and who come, in addition to the people who are just wandering through the store and are interested in buying wine, then they're more likely to come around the next time. It's very synergistic. Consumers behave the same way. The easier and more attractive and more interesting you're able to make the wine shopping experience, the more likely you are to be tasting them on a series of wines and do it on a regular or even invitation basis. Um, the more likely they are to trust you to be the ones who trade them up to wine in the next category. It,
Sure.
it's just really common sense when you think about it.
So, what you're seeing is that having a consistent wine tasting program. So every Wednesday, you've got, wine tasting between, noon and 3 or something is more impactful than, just kind of allowing it to happen whenever the winemaker is in town.
Well, they shop the same way everybody else does. The winemakers, they go to the places where they're more likely
Sure.
to make an impact, and so sometimes this is a long-term project. If you're not, if you have up till now only left it in the hands of the major distributor in
Mm-hmm.
the market,
Right.
but to seize more of it yourself, whether it's in a broader range of samples, more frequent samplings, um, different types of wines, or more organized events. In some cases, some stores have developed um, frequent shopper lists of that are wine only, and they communicate with them via email and let them know when these events are happening. Um, to make your wine selling location move from a commodity uh, seller to a mm, something more serious. It takes more than just stocking the wine. It
Sure.
it takes making the connection with the consumer. Um, we also talked about this before we went on, that it it needs to be all sorts of wine. Everybody's interested in pouring you their wine when they're new to the market, but there are other wines like cava and prosecco, which are very popular now, but popular compared to what? Popular compared to how they used to be. So that these are wines that you really want to be pouring at a certain time of year, just like you would like to be pouring rosé at a certain time of year. Um, Knowing which wines are gaining popularity in your marketplace is something that you can find out from your distributors, because it really does depend market to market. And in some places in the South, those red blends that you were talking about, or those sweet Moscatos, are through the roof, and
Sure.
the more of them, the merrier.
So you talk a lot about, having the winemaker there and you know, we know getting people and as close to the winery as possible and having that cool experience is great. Taking the winemaker out of their normal job and doing the 15 city tour is pretty challenging, particularly for some mid-size and smaller brands.
Sure.
Is there anything, you would recommend if you can't do that? So if we have, let's say, a grocery store decides that every Tuesday they're going to do a a wine tasting and they do the best they can to get the winemaker in or a winemaker in as frequently as possible, but certainly, you're not going to have that consistency with winemakers unless
Sure.
you're here in Northern California, and then even then it might be challenging. Um, so what's the next best thing to do? And I don't mean to put you on the spot, but
No,
I'm
no,
thinking you have an idea.
well, I have two ideas. One is that um, the distributors of the wine, the local distributors, are always willing to make arrangements to pour. They tend to want to do it on the weekends, because it's they know they're going to have a higher volume of people in the store, and most stores are more interested in doing it on the weekends as well. Um, but if you are lucky enough to have staffers who are really interested in wine and have can do the work, and really it's just the sort of high school substitute teacher theory of life. All they really need to know is more than everybody else in the room. They don't need to be experts. But if they get the information from the winery and they happen to know what region in California, the difference between soil in Napa and soil in Sonoma, or the difference between the weather, or why certain varietals do better in one subclimate than another, well, they're going to be way ahead of almost everybody they taste with.
Sure.
So if you can spare them, uh, it's a great experience for them, because if they're really interested in selling wine, they probably want to talk about it. Um, and it gives consumers a chance to talk with somebody who they've probably seen in the store, which might even be easier. Most wineries will supply plenty of information, whether it's electronic or handout um, sheets. Um, it doesn't have to be the bored person we've all seen who's who's the new person on the distributor team, who gets sent out on Saturday and all they're doing is texting their girlfriend or their boyfriend and pouring wine to anybody who walks up. That's about the worst sampling experience. Unfortunately, it's not the least common. It still happens. And so I think it's important for retailers not to hand over their precious real estate to people who are not really there to work. And sometimes that means you you do it yourself.
Sure, sure. So it sounds like if you can find some passionate advocates or in your area that love your brand, that might be an opportunity to give them a part-time job and bring them in and have them do your tastings in your
Sure,
absence.
sure,
And
Yeah.
absolutely.
it would also seem to be the norm, Karen, based on our research as well as what we're seeing, is that really truly educating your employees that are going to be working that aisle is a significant influence to the end experience. I
Sure.
also, we're seeing, in addition to NAP technology of the wine station, which gives you an LCD screen that can tell you what's being poured, the flavor profile, a little bit about the wine. We're also seeing some of our grocer partners also use kiosks, interactive kiosks, where you can type in what you're looking to eat that evening and it will give you recommendations. So technology is also providing some of that information, but I do think it is critical now that as customers feel that they're smarter, that really truly having the right people to manage that environment is going to play much bigger role than it did, as little as 2 or 3 years ago.
Sure, sure. Cool. I think, unless you have anything else to add, Jane, I think that wraps us up and gets us ready for questions. Is everybody ready for questions? Um, we have a big group on today, so again, if we don't get to your question on air, we will try to answer it offline. Additionally, as I mentioned in the beginning, the webinar is being recorded. So we'll send out both the recording as well as the full deck. And that takes us about 48 hours to get out and back to you, but you will have it. So if you have any questions, let me know. I'm going to skip to the question slide here really quickly.
And is there any chance that we got Ed back?
I do not see Ed. We are working on getting Ed back. Let me see. Um, I don't, I see him on, but with no audio. Um,
Hmm.
so I don't, I don't know. Um, so let's see here on questions.
Well, I hope I did him justice in trying to cover his needs. Ed has had some great successes in their stores. I will say, as a partner with them, um, and as a purely as a consumer, it is fascinating to me what is happening in the grocery environment today, in the retail wine environment. It is, as somebody that is always pressed for time and has little opportunity to really make grocery shopping an experience. The retailers out there are doing an amazing, aggressive job to make that a comfortable experience. Wi-Fi lounges, wine tasting bars that look like, any great, Tapas wine bar that you could find in New York. And I just, kudos to what Harris Teeter is doing. I think they're really some major pioneers in the industry, and would have loved to have had Ed be able to share more of that with you all, but they are doing a fantastic job.
Good to hear. If you have any questions specifically for Ed, I will shoot them over to him after the webinar, and I'll get them answered for you since we seem to have some technical difficulty. Oh, the promise of technology. So, the one question we do have, and I think this might be for you, Ms. Jane, is does the research show varietal movement as well as upward price movement from sampling?
It does, actually, and we'll be releasing tomorrow some more of the nitty gritty. But what we saw, and it actually is very similar to what we saw when we did our on premise research, that some of your more common varietals Chardonnay, I love her, but those some of your more basic brands are starting to take a backseat to more interesting appellations and varietals that are just gaining some momentum. I think what we're seeing, two things. Price points are becoming very aggressive, and we have a new, very innovative, willing to try new things shopper making their marks on what is happening in wine retail and consumption is our millennials. You know, they are willing to take big risks. They're also a little bit more worldly. So you're seeing newer appellations really starting to take on new regions, Argentinian wines, you know, places that just had been in the backseat to California are really starting to have an uptick.
The next question is any evidence of this working in a restaurant or bar? And resoundingly, yes. Jane can speak to that, particularly with um Fleming's Prime Steakhouse and Wine Bar. They sample a ton. But you want to talk about a little bit about that?
Sure, absolutely. You know, again, it's the perfect storm has all come together. Consumers want more. They have a little bit more money in their pocket. Retailers and on-premise operators have listened to their cries of wanting to have more aggressive opportunities to sample and explore wines. Unfortunately, I think in the restaurant industry, what you're really seeing is the bottle is dead. You know, Jack talked about it earlier, where today, four diners are at a table together and they all want something very different. And the industry is starting to be forced to appeal to the consumer. So where we're seeing a product like the Wine Station have great application is to really be able to support this. You know, this is not a need to put 12 wine stations in a restaurant, but a 4 or 8 bottle system can really relieve a lot of the pressures that restaurateurs are experiencing today, and also gives you the opportunity now to more painlessly offer the half glass. One of our partners, Fogo de Chao, actually had never been able to launch a very aggressive or successful flight program, but have now added a 4 bottle wine station to most of their locations so that they could more easily have that middle ground and that upscale offering to their customers. Because what they saw was they have a beautiful and very expensive by the bottle list, but they just couldn't move it anymore. So we're seeing across all price points, operators really being able to utilize new technology, preservation technology in their favor.
Karen, if I may, I was going to add that in the long ago, when Olive Garden, which for a long time was the largest restaurant seller of wine in the U.S., when they were still in their early days, they routinely poured wine in the states where they were allowed to and offered guests a sample. And it was a way to get them used to the idea that wine was something you had with the Italian food experience. And it worked wonders for them.
Great. We're seeing a lot of questions on compliance and which states offer, w- sampling, what's allowed, etc. I don't think that's anything that we are going to be able to answer here. Um, and I would recommend that you talk to your counsel about that and see what you can and
Also, if
cannot
you're
do.
absolutely, I mean, every state has a different set of regulations, as does every county. But feel free, if you're interested, to email myself or find us online at Napa Technology. Our sales representatives are also quite knowledgeable. We do our best to understand the laws, but they change. They change aggressively as well. So, but please reach out and we'll see if we can point you in the right direction.
We have a couple more questions here. Any thoughts on the future of smaller bottles in the grocery store for anyone other than the major producers?
Boy, I don't even know the last time I've seen a smaller bottle section in anything but stores that have traditionally sold fine Bordeaux.
Okay.
but you don't, or sherry. Otherwise, you don't see them.
And
You
then
know, it would,
go ahead, Jane. Sorry.
sorry, as the, it would, what is really interesting, I think, is that, more consumption is happening at home. So although we're talking about indulging in small doses and what's happening in on-premise, we're still seeing that in off-premise, people want full bottles to come home. As we see that full bottles are coming home and they're starting to aggregate into that higher price point, I think we're also starting to see more and more luxury items ending up into the kitchen to help people manage their wine cellars at home. So I'm not so sure that splits are the way to appeal to customers today. We have not yet seen it being more aggressive in retail. But again, forward us that question. We can share it with Ed and see if we can get a better answer on his side as well.
Cool. Untraditional packaging. We're seeing some box wine and other untraditional packaging. Any idea if that might gain widespread adoption? This has less to do with size and more to do, I guess, with like the Tetra Paks and whatnot.
Tetra Paks are certainly getting popular with people who picnic and don't want to lug glass out. They're popular in major stadiums and facilities that want to pour wine, and they're awfully convenient. You can't fly with a corkscrew anymore. So if you only want a glass of wine and you don't want to be stuck with the hotel wine, and you walk into a wine store that has three something or other, or some reputable Tetra Pak wines, they're awfully attractive.
Now, does that impact the quality of the wine at all?
Well, they're not in the container for very long.
Right,
So, and you're only talking about the plastic that's in contact.
right.
That's the liner. Some people have said that if you keep them for more than a year, that there is some oxidization that occurs, but I don't think people who buy boxed wine are going to be keeping it for more than a week, frankly. And I don't know what the retailers, if they're buying a pallet of box wine and still have it a year later, they've made a mistake.
Cool. I think that's about it. Anything else you guys want to add?
No, I just thank you very much. Thank you, Jack. Again, I'm sorry that we had technical issues and lost Ed. Questions that were, on-premise retail specific that we can get answered, we'll get those answered and back out to you. And again, if you have any questions about our research, we'll be releasing that in a day or two. We'll have the webinar posted on our website, as well as Karen will distribute it to you. And if you have any questions, you can find me at Jane with a Y, Jayne, at napatechnology.com.
Great. Well, thank you guys so much. And we'll be chatting again soon. Thanks so much. Bye
Thank
bye.
you all.